This one is going to cover 4 categories, and I want to introduce the gentleman who had introduced Dr. Tom Thornton, reintroduce him. Harold Martin, of course, is from the Tucktainton Raven Moiety. The Sockeye House is a child of Yun Ye Di. Harold Martin has a vast knowledge, ecological and subsistence knowledge, what we now are reclaiming customary and traditional knowledge as opposed to subsistence. He has a lifetime of effort, a lifetime of knowledge, and is a person of resource that we've come to not only admire and respect, but depend on. Please help me welcome Harold Martin.
Thank you, Jerry. Welcome to this session. We have a limited time frame to listen to 4 speakers. We have limited time, so we'll limit it to 20 minutes per speaker. I will give you a 2-minute warning to wrap up your presentation. It's very critical that we stay within the timelines. In the interest of time, we'd like you to hold your questions until all presentations have been heard. Our first speaker will be Wayne Jenson. He's an architect and general partner in the Juneau firm Jenson, Yorba and Watt. Wayne has lived in Juneau since 1973 and has provided design services throughout Alaska from the Pribilof Islands to Metlakatla. He appears here today as a member of the Alaska Historical Commission, which advises the governor and the legislature on programs concerning the history and prehistory, historic sites and buildings on geographic names. Please welcome Wayne Jenson.
Thank you. I was asked to come here to represent the Alaska Historical Commission. I'm a relatively new member on that commission, but I'll kind of get through this and see if we have to answer any questions. So, the Historical Commission, as was mentioned, is an advisory group. We have 3 main missions. One is dealing with history and prehistory, historic sites and buildings, and geographic place names. And over the years, those 3 missions have merged into the Historical Commission. There's 9 members on the commission. 2 members are designated by statute, the Lieutenant Governor, Byron Malott, who is the chair of the commission, and the State Historic Preservation Officer, Judy Bittner. The other members are all appointed by the governor to serve 3-year terms and represent specific interests or categories on the commission. Jonathan Ross is the vice chair. He's the Alaska Native representative on the commission. He's from Chugach. Terrence Cole is a public member from Fairbanks. Doug Veltray is an archaeologist from Anchorage. Sorrel Goodwin, a historian, also from the Juneau-Douglas area. Candy Wagaman is representative of the Alaska Historical Society from Fairbanks, and Mike Caulfield, also representing Alaska's Historical Society from Homer. And I'm the architect designated position on the commission. I live in Douglas from Juneau here. And one of the things I'm going to focus on today is just the one mission about the geographic place names. Alaska statute designates the Alaska Historic Commission as the agency that deals with place names in Alaska. So we review, in that position, we review names for geographic features, which are lakes, streams, mountains, geographic features, but not, place names like cities and boroughs and things like that. So, and we coordinate with the U.S. Board of Geographic Place Names. They have the final say, but we have a review authority and do a lot of the groundwork in support of that board. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about just how you go about proposing a name. And there's ways to do that. They're all on the Office of History and Archaeology website. All the guidelines are there, the application forms are there. So I'd request anyone who's looking into place names to go to that resource. It's very good. And there's rename or name unnamed features. If there's any features out there that to your knowledge do not have a name, that's one issue. There's a way to correct names if they're not correct, and there's also a way to change names. Those three things then deal with place names. And this just shows the application form. It's a very good outline as to what the board looks like and what the U.S. board looks for in naming a feature. It goes through the different types of place names, and I'll go through that in a minute here and follow this application form. There's different categories of place names. The locally used place names, descriptive names, Alaska Native names, commemorative names, and historic names. And there can be, some of the names can be in multiple categories. They don't always have to be in one name, but typically on the form, you pick a name, pick a category that you're using for the place name. And I mentioned the guidelines. The guidelines go through these in some detail, and that's listed on the Office of History and Archaeology website. So I'll do a brief explanation of what those different categories mean. A locally used name is probably the single best reason to name a feature. It's one that community members, the local people use for calling some feature. And it's found on some other documents or plat publications or some oral histories. Some of the examples might mean Highbush Lake in Petersburg, Bonnie Lake in Matsu, Denali. Denali probably fits into several of these categories. It's certainly a locally used name. Another category is a descriptive name. Often the name the applicant uses to describe a feature as opposed to a locally used name. It's relevant, it's in good taste, it's not derogatory, those are always things we look for. And it's been in use for a period of time, at least 5 years. So some of the descriptive names, Crescent Moon Island, Icy Strait, Denali again is pretty descriptive. That's one that fits into all these categories. Alaska Native names is one of the other categories. It's also a name that's in common local use. It's linguistically appropriate to the area, so that throughout the state there would be different linguistic uses of that name, and so it's important that a name in a particular area is appropriate to the linguistically appropriate to that area. So. And that the groups in the area that are affected by a name agree upon that. So that's another issue that we look at all the time. So, and then it goes through the Alaska Native Language Center at the University of Alaska Fairbanks to make sure that the spelling and the diacritical marks and all those things are correct and appropriate. Some of the Alaska Native place names go through some of these, and again, Denali is another one that falls into that category that have been used throughout the state. Commemorative names are probably the ones that are the most proposals, and they're typically commemorating a historical person, an event, and they're naming a mountain or a river for a person or for an event that took place. There's lots of different criteria under that category to see that that's appropriate as well. There are a few of these that I've mentioned that I've listed here that have been named after people or events. Jimmy Doolittle, Mount Chosin Few is named for the people those that were in the Korean War. Historic names, there would be evidence that the name was first in fact used, and this, a lot of native names would fall into this category, obviously. And it's associated with the area, so it's an appropriate name for that particular area. Some of the historic names, and I do a few here that you might a historic name, like Cape Canaveral was one that one of the members brought up and said, it's no longer that name, but that would have been the historic name of that area. New Archangel for Sitka, Denali actually Denali was a historic name. It was changed to Mount McKinley and then changed back as a historic name. So that's one of them that fits into several of these categories. Those criteria would apply to both newly named features and renamed features. Name changes are something that the commission takes pretty seriously because of all the old maps that are available out there that show these different names. You've got all your GPS features have names in them, the marine maps, the road maps. So changing a name has some conflicts potentially in that if someone's in trouble and they want help at a certain lake, it's important that the first responders know the name of the lake, the appropriate name of the lake, and they have maps to do that. So changing a name is something that we take pretty seriously. It's not that it doesn't happen, and it can happen, and it should in cases, but you have to understand the things that tip over when a name changes, because maps have been in place for years, and people know that, and there's other resources that reference those names. So it is something that we take seriously. There's also the whole process of how you go about contacting people in the vicinity about name changes so that there's a consensus to that change in name. And names in wilderness areas, designated wilderness areas, also have another overlay in that the land manager has to be involved in that as well. So things like BLM needs to be involved in name changes. So, I'm going to go through a little bit the process. I know we're a little short on time, but the process is defined in the guidelines on the architecture of the Office of History and Archaeology. And I should mention that, I mentioned earlier that there's both the State Commission on Historical Commission. There's also the U.S. Board of Geographic Names. The U.S. Board has the final say. Applications can be submitted to both organizations, either to the state or the federal government or the federal board. Those applications that are submitted to the federal board always come back to the State Historical Commission for action and review. And then after our review, all of the recommendations, either to pass or not, or to approve or not to approve, are sent back to the U.S. board, and they have the final review. So we do a lot of the groundwork, a lot of the research, contacting folks in the area, other organizations, communities that are affected, to make sure that there's consensus, and then we take action on that, and that action then is referred back to the U.S. Board of Geographic Place Names for final review. And we do, in reviewing the application, we see that first of all, it's accurate, that the submittal is accurate, that the map is accurate, that shows what area is being changed or named additionally, and that all the other people in the area, whether it be communities or tribes or private owners, are notified and they're aware of this change and have an opportunity to respond to that. I mentioned the Geographic Names Board. They want to make sure that all of the USGS maps, the name that they select goes on the USGS map. So they're the official board that does that. And so changing USGS maps is not something they take lightly. They do those around for a long time. And so they do consider that. And when they do make a decision, then those USGS maps, the next time they're produced, would show the new name. And again, I mentioned all the different groups that are notified. After the action by the Historic Commission is taken, the people that made the proposal are notified again. and they're notified of the meeting that's going to be reviewed, and they're notified of the action after the meeting. And we only meet twice a year. We meet typically in the fall or early winter, and then again in the spring. And it takes a while to process one of these applications. So, if you have in mind that you want to make a proposal for a name, you should plan some time for that, because it takes a long time for staff to review the applications and make sure they're accurate and make sure that everybody in the area is notified and has a chance to review it, and then get the information to the board to review it. Since we only meet, twice a year, if you submit something, a couple of months ahead of the meeting, you probably will go to the next meeting or even the next meeting before all the application is reviewed appropriately. And again, the Geographic Names Board receives all of the actions that the state board takes, whether we review them, whether we reject them, or approve them. So they get everything back. So it doesn't just stop at the state board. And then when the state board or the U.S. board approves them, it goes into the final database for the Geographic Names Information System, which is again what the USGS uses for all of their maps. And there's some naming examples. One of the things that, one of the criteria is that there aren't any names that are derogatory, and over the years, a lot of those derogatory names have been removed or renamed. There's one example where a derogatory name was renamed to a native name, and then another one where a locally used name was more appropriate. And this is an interesting one. This was the Johnson River. There was a couple of forks of the Johnson River, and it just so happened that the Crooked Creek Fork, which they named, was a border between two hunting districts. And so it was very important that the locals who used the term Crooked Creek had an understanding of what that border was between two areas. So that was one that was local use and also had some legal consequences as well. And an example of a commemorative name was the Globemaster Peak, and that was named recently. It was an unnamed feature in an area, and it was renamed for the Globemaster, a big military aircraft that crashed in 1952, and all 52 members, 52 victims were killed. And that is still in the news because they're still exploring that site and finding some of the remnants of the aircraft and some of the parts. Another change was a native name change, where Rat Island in the Aleutians was renamed to a locally approved native name. And then the Black River in Fort Yukon was renamed to the Duranchik River. And there's another interesting one, is associative names, where a mountain, a glacier, a stream, a bay might all be named by the same thing. So there's an association of that. There's some examples here, in one Teonek, one down by Sitka and Craig with Cutthroat Lake and Cutthroat Creek. And then a local one here is Mendenhall Glacier, Mendenhall Lake, and Mendenhall River, all named associative names. So that's an interesting one too, where you can have connections. Otherwise, they try to stay away from naming too many things in that area. That's another criteria, is that if there's already a Cutthroat Creek in that area, we don't want to name another Cutthroat Creek just a few miles away, because then there's confusion as to which one is there. And again, some of it is for safety purposes. If someone says they're in trouble at Cutthroat Creek, we want to know which Cutthroat Creek they're talking about so they can respond appropriately. I'm going to leave questions. I'm going to cut my stuff short here because I wanted to go through quickly, and I'll leave the questions, and we can get to the next presenter. And I'll be available throughout the rest of this to answer questions. So thanks for your attention.
I have a question. Question is, if a community, for example, like Haines, is it possible to have also the Tlingit name of that particular community to be listed as well, as opposed to eliminating the name of Haines? Because I just asked this person over here who comes from that community, I asked him about his lands, and I asked him, is it okay if they call it Deschutes? And he said it was okay.
There's a process called variance, where a name can be listed as the official name, and then a variant name, like in parentheses. That's possible, I think, particularly with the State Historic Commission. My understanding, and again, I'm pretty new on this commission, but my understanding is that the official U.S. name would be the one that they choose, and they wouldn't have a series of variants. But it is possible to have, a name and then a parentheses where there's a second, another well-known name associated with a particular feature, whether that's and for one thing, for Haynes, it's a little different because the board doesn't deal with city names. They would deal with mountains, rivers, geographic features. So we don't get involved in the names of cities or boroughs or those kind of place names. So if the people in Haynes wanted to change it, I think that would be up to them, and then we just have to go back to a deal. But geographic names, there is a variant possibility.
Again, to ensure that we hear from all our speakers, we'd like it